And so we will now ask Dr. Wendy Jones to speak. Dr. Jones is a pharmacist and member of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the UK, also founder member of the Breastfeeding Network, which provides evidence-based information on medications and breast information for parents and health professionals. So welcome, Wendy.
I feel so privileged to be able to speak after James, who has actually said the things that make me, and why I spend so many hours a day trying to help mothers with breastfeeding. What I want to present today is how, as medics, we can get in the way of breastfeeding, and all the barriers that come about, where people seem to assume that breast milk just turns off like a tap. Before I start speaking, I want to share with you the picture on the front of the slide here, which is of my youngest grandchild, Ottilie, who was born in May in the middle of lockdown. She was born 4 weeks early, weighing just 3.5 pounds, and had to be admitted to neonatal intensive care unit because she was so tiny and had lots of growing to do. Beth needed 25 mils of donor breast milk at one stage to enable her to get 4 hours of sleep. She was pumping at all times, trying to feed Ottilie as best she could, but Ottilie was actually failing to have enough energy to feed to get her calories up enough to keep growing. And she said when she had that 25 mils of donor breast milk, it was as if the mums of the world who had gathered round her and embraced her in a big hug and said, "It's okay, we've got your baby." And that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about donor breast milk. What I fight every day with is medical professionals who are striving so hard to do no harm that they actually end up causing harm. We know that most professionals, whether they're doctors, pharmacists, dentists, podiatrists, don't have much undergraduate training on breastfeeding. And drugs in breast milk is very much what they pick up along the way, possibly when they were feeding their own babies. And this is what came out a lot in my PhD. And the BNF, the book that we all have on our desks, doesn't provide any quantitative information, and it has lots of really confusing things that don't help us make that evidence-based decision. So it says things like amount in breast milk unlikely to be harmful, but the manufacturer advises avoid. And whenever I've talked to doctors and pharmacists, the bit at the end is what they hang on to, because they see the manufacturers must have some information that they haven't shared with us. We're not sure, we might be sued. What it actually means is the manufacturers aren't required to conduct those tests initially, and perfectly rightly, because we don't want anything to harm our babies. If ever I had been asked to give my baby a drug that I knew nothing about, I'd be scared. But we can make informed choices if we have the right data. And it also matters whether the baby is premature, whether it's newborn, or whether it's toddler. And Simon and Natalie's research about how breast milk doesn't change with time is actually fascinating. That we know that we can give milk at various times and it will still be nutritious. And so often I hear mums being told, well, your baby is now 6 months old, 6 weeks old, you pick a time. it doesn't need breastfeeding anymore. There's no goodness left. Formula is just as good. If there is one phrase in the human language, that's the one I'd like to take away. One of the things that I see quoted really, really frequently is mums being told there is a time after which you take a drug when it reaches a maximum level. And if you can avoid feeding at that time, your baby will have less exposure. But if we're taking any chronic medication, by the time it has reached 5 half-lives, the time that it takes for the drug to deplete by half, it will have reached a steady state. So timing becomes totally and utterly irrelevant. And it particularly seems to coincide with mums who are taking sertraline for depression and anxiety. When you're anxious, it's incredibly difficult to say, I will take a drug and continue to breastfeed, because your brain says, I need to do everything to protect my baby, so I'll just keep on breastfeeding. But somebody says, yes, this drug is probably okay, or only a little bit gets into your baby's system, or take it before the baby's longest sleep, and the anxiety levels go high, 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 high. And they start thinking, how can they do this? If we're told that sertraline reaches its maximum 2 hours after you've taken the tablet, some mums will do anything to avoid feeding at that time. So they will stop feeding, or they'll introduce formula, they'll take a walk around the block, they'll do anything rather than feed their baby. But it's a total and utter waste of time. All we're doing is putting their anxiety up. It's really interesting, since August, as the number of cases of COVID have gone up, on some days 95% of my messages to drugs in breast milk have been about anti-anxiety and antidepressant drugs. People have become really, really scared, and they aren't able to see people all of the time. They aren't able to have that hug they all need. They aren't able to share the oxytocin. And today I have my oxytocin necklace on that always comes out, because oxytocin is just what we are sharing today, talking about breastfeeding. So telling a mum to discard a drug for a period that she's going to take a long time makes no sense whatsoever. So if I could only lay that myth to bed today, I'd be happy. The other myth is that drugs which can only be given by injection can't ever get into breast milk. If the mum can't take it as a tablet, whatever gets into breast milk can't be absorbed by the baby. And there are very, very common antibiotics like this. It's also true of insulin. It's even more true of a range of drugs called anti-TNF drugs. One of the reasons that I became fascinated about drugs in breast milk was because I have Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel condition. And it causes the lining of the gut to be completely inflamed from a small area to a large area. And we have to take a variety of drugs. I actually set up a Facebook groups for breastfeeding mums with inflammatory bowel diseases, and we have 1,200 members from across the world who are all trying their best to protect their babies, because actually being formula fed as a baby increases your risk of having this. Whether autoimmune conditions come with being formula fed, or whether there's something else going on, we don't really know. But certainly the foreign proteins of breast milk crossing the gut in those first few days has got to be detrimental. So the anti-TNF drugs have to be given either by infusions or injections. So the babies are not going to get some. And then we have breast milk protecting the babies from the higher risk of developing them. So of course we want to have these babies breastfed. It matters for their future health. I wouldn't wish inflammatory bowel disease on my very worst enemy. We have lots of situations that I could tell you about, but I'm just going to have a few examples. This mum turned up at the hospital with her 5 months old to have an MRI scan. And just getting to a hospital at 8 a.m. with a baby is quite a challenge. But Dad was outside with the baby. But 20 minutes later, they were on their way home because she was told that she couldn't have it while she was breastfeeding. The baby is now 1 year old. She has just had the MRI and she's still breastfeeding. What was the cost to the health economy of cancelling her first appointment? What about the mother's health? She wasn't sent for an MRI for no reason. But actually, she need never have waited in the first place. The drug is poorly absorbed from the gut, and it only lasts it halves in the bloodstream every 1.7 hours. So just like it takes 5 half-lives to build up to a steady state, it takes 5 half-lives to degrade to a state where there's negligible amount there, and that's 8.5 hours, whereas most mums with MRIs are told they can't breastfeed for 24 hours. Watch this, there is going to be some very interesting research published this month. I was very proud to have involved with writing some guidance for mums who are having anaesthetics after whilst they're breastfeeding. And it's probably the most common question that I'm ever asked. I answer around 10,000 queries from mums and healthcare professionals every year. And yes, there's still an awful lot of them from Ireland, and I kind of feel like I'm adopted by Ireland. I should have come out to you at the beginning of March, but first of all, EasyJet, my flight went bust, and then COVID appeared. And because I have inflammatory bowel disease, I was in the Shield group. So all these mums are told they can't breastfeed after a general anaesthetic. But what happens to a mum who is feeding after a caesarean section in an emergency that's been undertaken under general anaesthetic? Do we tell her that she can't breastfeed for 24 hours, or do we actually put the baby to the breast in the recovery room? I think that's what we probably do. Mums who are in hospital may be there without a breast pump. They maybe have gone in as an emergency. We tell them they can't breastfeed, they can't have their baby with them. What's about the risk of mastitis? What about the babies who refuse to take a bottle? Because not all babies do take bottles. It's a very different sucking mechanism. It doesn't taste the same. And actually, what's the risk and benefit? Could this baby then become cow's milk protein intolerant? We don't know. One formula might matter. One bottle of formula might matter. So I'm very pleased that the guidelines have come out, and they've also been adopted in America as well, which made my heart sing. So in this other situation, mum has gone to an optician's, and she has iritis, which is an inflammatory condition of the eye, and she's given steroid eye drops. And I've said, doctor, optometrist, I'm not quite sure who she saw, said, I'm concerned about you breastfeeding on them, so could you please pump and dump for a week? Even the words pump and dump make my heart stop, because that suggests that what you are expressing is totally useless and poisoned. The mum called me the following day and said, I tried very hard last night, but my baby has screamed all night with trapped wind. Do I really have to stop breastfeeding for a week, and actually she didn't. If she pressed over the corner of her eye where the tear duct is, which is how most eye drops should be used, the drugs would not have got into her breast milk at all. So that baby has screamed all night. Mum has had to pump and throw away this precious milk that her body has made for her for no good reason. This mum was having ingrowing toenails removed, and she was turned away and said unless she was able to stop breastfeeding for 24 hours, they wouldn't do the process. Actually had one mum this week who said, I physically can't walk because my toenails are so painful. But the podiatrist wanted her to sign a form agreeing to not breastfeed for 24 hours. That's kind of difficult because people can tell you things, but nobody can force you to do something against your will. There's not going to be a camera in your house that night watching to see if you do breastfeed. This podiatrist had said the local anaesthetic he was going to inject into her toenail would make the baby's mouth go numb from the amount passing in breast milk, and that the phenol that he was going to apply to kill the nail bed would be toxic. What do we use when we suture mums after childbirth? We use local anaesthetics. What do we use if we have a tooth extraction or a tooth filling? We use local anaesthetics. Has anybody ever found that their right hand went numb after they had a local anaesthetic? Did their mouths go numb afterwards? When you think about it, it's total and utter rubbish. And phenol we put into mouthwashes and toothpaste. This mum had spent most of the day crying, and completely unnecessary. And it saddened me. This situation, I think, was probably the first query that actually made me cry. I received this in July. Baby's 15 months old, and her dad had died suddenly of COVID. And with everything else that was going on, she hadn't been able to be with her dad. She'd had to talk to her dad over FaceTime. She'd had to say goodbye over the phone. But something else had gone on, and her husband has left her. So you can imagine how awful her life must be. She's gone to see the doctor. She's really visible. She's having trouble sleeping. She needs somebody to help her. But he said he can't prescribe anything unless she stops breastfeeding. Excuse me. And her cry was, I'm a single mum. I don't want to stop. I don't know how to settle my baby without breastfeeding. But I really need somebody to help me. I feel so exhausted fighting the situation that is there. She could have had her antidepressant. She could have had some tolerance, some empathy from the people who understood that breastfeeding is not just about the milk. It's about so much more. It's about helping babies to soothe and comfort. And it's also about oxytocin and us feeling better too. When you stop breastfeeding, anxiety and depression can get worse as oxytocin is removed. This mum had had surgery for gallstones, and they accepted that she could feed after the anaesthetic, but then she said she was told that she couldn't breastfeed on the painkillers they'd given her. She'd stressed she was breastfeeding and asked for everything to be breastfeeding safe, but they'd given her something. The baby was there with her husband in the family room, but the nurse had managed to get some formula, and she wouldn't listen that the baby was cow's milk protein intolerant and that mum was on her special diet. And she said, it's better than being poisoned by your milk. She knew she was wrong, but this nurse was so insistent. The baby's screaming, it hasn't fed for 6 hours, and she just wants to go home and be left alone. How much of this could be made better by just somebody having the right information source there, by writing the guidelines? The anaesthetic guidelines actually do talk about which drugs can be given during breastfeeding as well. So the information is there in those guidelines. It turns off like a tap. Well, we know it doesn't. Not everyone can express has access to a breast pump or can let down to a breast pump. But if you don't express the milk, you can get engorgement and mastitis. Then we've got the babies who won't feed from the bottle and the formula that might not be suitable. And the worst thing is, so often people are told you need to stop breastfeeding, but nobody tells them how to manage their supply or how to start again. What I hear time and time again is mums being told it doesn't matter that they want to breastfeed, and they feel disempowered. Genevieve, do I think this situation is getting better or worse? I like to think it is better than it was 25 years ago. But if it was truly better, then I could retire, and other things wouldn't have, things wouldn't have to be said all the time. I'm really hoping that we will have a tide change where medics will be trained, will have continuous education, and it will improve. But it needs the basic understanding that breastfeeding is vital to that mum, to that baby, to the medical service, to the whole world. And that's the message that I hope we're all taking away from today. I feel so empowered by having listened to so many brilliant speakers. I am working within a group in the UK about trying to make evidence-based information available to all mums who need medication when they're pregnant or breastfeeding. And we're starting to just move the wording in the BNF slightly. But we need to listen to mothers, and we need to have training. And we need, above all, to value breast milk. If a medic doesn't know the answer, and no GP can ever know the answer to everything, what they do need to know is somebody who does know, or where to look for the information. And if you've got a new whizzy drug that's been sold to you as being better than everything else, if we don't know about its safety in breast milk, let's go to something slightly older. Training, they need knowledge about the safety of drugs in breast milk, and be sensitive about what mums want to do. I'm going to continue sharing information. I've discovered that writing books didn't actually get me anywhere, but maybe just one day, after days like this, it will all improve. So everybody go away and empower 2 other people, and we will have made a massive difference this afternoon. Thank you.